15th, 10:04, County Cannabis Working Group meeting. We're going to keep talking about the retail ordinance. If we have time, get into cannabis manufacturing and processing. Discuss a change of the chair of this group. And public comment. We can do these things out of order. If anybody's got any public comment they're itching to start with, that's welcome. If not, then we can just get to the first agenda item. All right. I had some ideas in the last 2 weeks. I spent some quiet time myself looking at the maps. We have those still available to put up on the computer? So
Vanessa, is the icon still on the, or the file? Okay. If not, I can return to the office and get them.
Okay, yeah, we don't need it in right this second. So I had this idea of, well, I was looking at the maps and I noticed something that I didn't notice when I was looking at the maps here during the meetings. And that's that the majority of all the schools, at least the ones that are on our maps, are not in the commercial zones. And if you look at them, they're quite a distance from the commercial zones. And so that provides a pretty significant setback on its own. There's only one school that's even in the commercial zone, and that's the Seventh-day Adventist Church that's less than 600 feet to one of the existing dispensaries. So I wanted to look at that map and with that in mind. And then, yeah, and there may be a school over about kind of near the fairgrounds area that I remember being on the map that's not on the map currently.
There was, I think it was called the McCarthy Community School that was on Williams Drive, which is near the fairgrounds, but I was told afterward that that's no longer in operation, so that's free.
Okay. Okay. And then we talked about delivery and then and decided to kind of table that because of some concerns and maybe address it later, which makes sense to me and pretty much everybody here. And then it kind of got me thinking about the idea of retail outlets in outlying areas like Gasky or maybe out by the border could present sort of the same kind of issues that the sheriff brought up around delivery. And I was hoping that maybe Bill or Sheriff could comment a little at some point today about that. And it may make sense in the beginning to not be having outlets out in the outlying areas until there's some more resources for law enforcement to deal with the extra time that it might take to, you know, maybe answer an alarm call or, you know, whatever issues. So that was one thought. And these are sort of getting back to ideas of, we've been trying to find ways of limiting the number of stores in the county in sort of a natural way rather than having a cap, if that makes sense. And not allowing them in the outlying areas, like say having a radius or a zone from kind of a town center, that would be another tool to limit the total number of stores in the county. Just an idea. Okay. I don't have the mouse to go down on the map. Should I run the mouse?
Hey, Jesse. So some of the discussions, I mean, I guess I missed the last two meetings because I had been out of town. But just to briefly catch me up, I don't want to hold up the group, but
you're supposed to watch the meetings on the video.
I did, but I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity since we're here.
Yes.
What we're talking about now is there a concern within the group or the staff as to having operations like retail or whatnot or manufacturing in outlying areas of the county? Is that something we're discussing right now? Or
that's something I'd like to discuss. It didn't come up. We talked a lot about delivery and decided to kind of maybe have it as something we'd add at a later time.
Okay.
Because the sheriff brought up some valid concerns about security with delivery driving and not knowing how it's going to work out and all of that. And so it seemed like kind of an unnecessary complication at this time.
Okay, I understand that. Cool, thanks.
Yeah. And so that's where we're going with that. And then that just led me to thinking about, we have this commercial space in Gasky and we see it as a viable spot and this up here by the state line. And then I hadn't really even thought about that angle that much. I don't think about crime in dispensaries, really, or even something as simple as an alarm going off, that doesn't necessarily have to be crime, but it takes time from law enforcement to answer these things. So that's what got me thinking that having stores in these outlying areas may not be the right idea, at least in the beginning, on this first draft. Trying to, in the interest of making this ordinance simple, getting this done, finding something that we can all live with, limiting the number of stores without forcing the county into an RFP process. That was sort of my thinking here, so. Looking for feedback on that.
Might suggest does anybody on the board have a problem with that, or might I suggest we solicit some public comment, see what they would think about it?
Yeah, definitely. So just to be clear, the idea would be maybe not even up in the Smith River area, and this could take care of a lot of the concerns with needing these big setback circles. So the other idea here is how to get away with smaller setbacks, because we have a dispensary that we all agree is suitable for the community on North Crest. It gets along with the community and it fits. But it's less than 600 feet from a school. So to me, that shows that that's an appropriate setback. We have a dispensary with a setback that the community accepts. Let's use that as a standard. Now now the concern is the number of stores, I think. If one store in that location is okay, that's one thing, but we don't want 10 in that location, right? So that's where I was thinking of getting into going back to space between stores.
Okay. I got a question. Sheriff Stevenson, is the only sheriff's outlet within the city limits of Crescent City, where like a substation? Do you have any substations anywhere else? Yeah, like if a call went out and we had an emergency, it would basically come to the central space here in Crescent City. You would then send your call out from centralized space. You don't really have a. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, that does start to make a little bit more of security issues clear. I mean, if literally the only space that, dispatch can come out of is within the city limits of Crescent City, it does, lend itself to a little bit of a call time to get to anywhere else in the county on the outlying areas.
Yeah, it's a haul to go to Gasky for an alarm call.
Jesse, if somebody in Smith River called the dispensary in Crescent City to deliver, wouldn't they?
Oh, I'm talking about the police answering emergency calls or alarm calls. Delivery is, and we're not going to do delivery for now.
Yeah, say like in Gasky, say we had something in Gasky or Smith River in the outlying areas.
Yeah.
Obviously, the same thing could be true of Crescent City. I mean, there could be in a local downtown area, there could be a problem, and the sheriff that needs to respond is on patrol in Smith River and has to turn and drive back. I mean, maybe it's less so that time, but that's always a possibility too. I don't really see that as being a concern necessarily, the 15-minute drive time to respond to a false alarm or a real alarm as being a huge issue.
They already have that problem with, the liquor stores that are out there and the other thing, just parties or anything that's in the outlying area. I don't think that's something that this committee really needs to get into. We need to, figure out what we want to do with the stores and where we, what restrictions we'll put on it, and then the people are going to diverse and have the stores where they want them, and
Okay.
it'll work into the community just like a liquor store did.
What are we doing here then? Because it seems to me that's exactly what we're trying to do is determine if we need to limit a number and where they go. That's precisely what we're trying to do.
I'd like to land on that. You know, I think both Jesse and I have attended a few meetings in between meetings here and spoke on behalf of this committee. And one of the meetings I went to, I you know, was kind of defending really both sides, you know, Jesse's point of view and my point of view, right? And trying to explain that we have worked through consensus on this committee to come up with what we believe is the best idea. I told the board here that last week, so that we aren't handing policy or not, this isn't policy, but an ordinance, a game plan to the Board of Supervisors that is somewhat gray and wishy-washy, right? We're trying to come up with something that the community could accept through this process and maybe endorse through the county Board of Supervisors. And so, you know, we all started on opposite ends, right? And we got to remember that we're working through consensus here, and we've got to figure out a program that we believe works best for our community. And I'm speaking to all you guys now, specifically you, Kurt. The concept that we're moving, we are all moving from where we were, left to right, right to left, whatever, to come up with a policy that fits in Del Norte County. It's not crazy extreme like Humboldt County or other places in the country. It's an abbreviated version of allowing, you know, a cannabis industry to exist with, I'd say, local players, local individuals. We want to keep it small enough so that it doesn't attract big outside whatever that may be, right? Because that's, you know, that's not the direction I believe that is best for our community, right? And so with that, we got to keep that in mind. And you know, Jesse mentioned earlier, maybe we could all accept something less on the dispensary setback. Well, that we're using one ideal example, and I think there's a slippery slope there to say that, you know, a 600 foot or 500 foot would work. Well, yes, it would work in that one case on a known entity with experience. But we don't know what the next one brings, and that's the part we got to really seriously think through, right? So as we're trying to come up with an abbreviated version that isn't a free-for-all for our county, I would suggest we use large circles. The larger the better, and then that will limit the locations, and then don't have any other rules. Don't have, you know, a number of dispensaries or a number of things.
Right.
Just use the circles. And when I say large, I mean certainly larger than the 500-600 feet, but just something.
Right. We're having a problem with the size of the circle, though.
Yeah.
That's what we keep bumping into, and why we keep having to talk about the same things. Is we're having, and just to make it clear, I think that we've all identified that, like, one of the issues that we're dealing with is we all agree we have a dispensary that fits,
Right.
but it's way closer than any of the setback numbers we're talking about. So therein lies a conflict that I
only
think is
thing-
worth addressing.
I think the
That's
only
what I'm trying to
thing,
get
the
at.
only
So
thing
hang on,
that,
just let me finish this
Sure.
thought. I think that it's important to possibly explore other methods of limiting the number of stores. We all agree we want to limit the number of stores without having to pick a number, right? And so we've been trying to do it by having huge setbacks around schools and possibly youth centers. And what we're running into is that's creating problems. I see a circle. Look at the map right here that I got up, okay? You can see the,
Give us the color codes again.
okay, schools.
Yeah, reds are schools.
Okay, see right here, okay, this is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, right? See where the cursor is? Okay, that wipes out all of the commercial space on Northcliff, all of it, basically. Now, if you look at the other schools, look to your left, over here, all these schools, lots of schools, they are all a long ways from any commercial zone. See that? So you could have a 0 setback, and you couldn't get within 1,000 feet of these schools because there's no zoning that allows for it. Now, the only places in the county where the zoning does allow you to get close to schools is up here. right? And that's why we've been talking about this area of concern, Smith River, Fort Dick, right? And you want big circles up there. So why not just say, let's just not put it up there. Let's not put them in the outlying areas. We have one good reason, the sheriff. Not put dispensaries in the outlying areas like Gasky, like up here. And then that takes care of the problem with them being too close to schools. And it satisfies the sheriff's concern of potentially responding to stuff. You know, if that's because they brought up that concern in terms of delivery. So by extension, that makes sense for other.
And the point of talking about that is so therefore to reduce the size of the buffer zone, right?
Yes, so that we can have a dispensary that, I see your hand there, just one second. So
what I was going to say is that I think you're right in that we all agree that the current dispensary that we're discussing on Northcrest is acceptable. The problem is that as a county, we have no way to box that dispensary to say it can't change the way it is from right now. For example, advertising or sizing or clientele necessarily. Sure. We have no way as a county to say that can't get any different than it is right now.
I think that's not true. I think that's not true. I think we did talk about that. I think Joel would say that's true legally. We don't have a way. But as a small community, I think we do have control over that. We do have the power to be able to apply pressure to operations that are outside of what the community wants. And I think that it's not going to be realistic to make a blanket legal rule that prevents that from ever happening, because then we're not going to have anything. But I think we're a small enough community, and in the cannabis industry, you don't see, businesses wanting generally to pick a fight with a small community. It makes it very difficult to run your operation if you're constantly being scrutinized and people are riding you to the line because you're pissing everybody off. I think that we do have the ability to apply pressure. We may not be able to legally say you can't have a sign, that's offensive, but I think the community can monitor that a little bit. Otherwise, we just need to say, the huge setbacks, which means you're not going to have, and the 2 dispensaries that we have are going to be gone, and basically the only place you got to put them is maybe on Elk Valley, and that's fine. We can just do that and be done with it. It doesn't sound. Public comment, I saw a hand there. If you come to the podium so that everyone can hear you on the. You got to come up to the mic so the people on the video can hear you. Thanks.
I was just going to ask if you could enlarge in your scroller so that we could follow with you.
Legend. You want to see the legend part? We can enlarge, but then you can't
so
see.
As you're scrolling across the images and you're discussing certain areas, we can't really see where you're moving your mouse.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best. It's difficult to manipulate this screen a little bit. So,
Heidi, on this map that's on the screen right now, where is the county line compared to the city line?
Here's Washington Boulevard right here. Everybody see that cursor?
I mean, all of this is
It's a little cross hatch.
So the land south of Washington would be in the city. And then, then you're in the county until you get to, I believe it's Harding, where Port-au-Prince is. Port-au-Prince is in the county, and then the property that used to be a car dealership that's opposite of it on Harding and Northcrest is in the city. And the area, I guess, just south of Washington, down that area, the Roosevelt tract, that's all county. Washington Boulevard, all county. On the, I guess, the north end of town, there's a mobile home park and the Renters Petroleum, or the Patriot Station. That would be in the area where the line is between the city and the county.
Is there a way that we could have like this screen blacked out for city and then only just the county part be there so that we can tell where we can
Yeah,
talk
we can do
about?
that. We can do that. I'll make a
You mean
list to
just
have that for the next
put a
meeting.
black spot where the city is, because we don't have any control over that anyhow.
Sure.
Color it or something.
You know,
Yeah, we can-
but
we
then
can do
you'd
some
have a
type of
half a circle here
pattern or something
whatever, you
to-
know, so then you'd see exactly where we're talking about.
Okay.
I know right now we're talking North Crest and,
Yeah, so just
in
for
that
now,
area,
though,
but-
if you want, can everyone see the cursor here?
yeah,
This being Washington, so this is the, kind of the line. To the north is county, to the south is city. And then you get to this corner here and you come down Washington, right, or no, North Crest.
right.
And so on the left is the city and on the right is the county.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in that area, there's a portion of the city that has
mean, we
county
only have
zoning
that
on
much.
it because it used to be in the county.
Right,
and
right.
the land use
Then
layer
does the
wasn't
city come
updated.
into
I think
here?
where those lines are
Yeah.
probably,
And this might be city, and it's either this road or this road, basically.
those lines probably aren't super important. It'd be easy to, it's nice to see, but it's probably not that important.
Former county zoning.
But when you look at all these schools are in the city limits, they're gonna have their own setbacks for that. So I think we're kind of going off track with the idea of trying to limit the number of stores solely with giant circles, because what we're ending up doing, as you can see, is we're wiping out the most perfect commercial area that everybody agrees is the prime place.
Yeah. So can you, Jesse, kind of back up and tell us what your game plan or your thought is in
Right.
terms of, I see where you're going now, and it does seem to make sense. So we would have this kind of a go zone and then a no-go zone.
Right.
And then those no zones would be where? Like you mentioned Fort Dick or.
Yeah, so
other
I
areas.
would, Joel or Heidi might answer the technical side of how you draw that line. If you say, like, pick some point in town, like the sheriff's station, and say a 4-mile radius, you know, and it's got to be in there. Or you draw a line on roads. I don't know how the dividing up, you know, how that works out. If
Right.
it's by zone, then it's a zoning district. If it's,
So
Heidi could weigh in
So
here maybe on
you're
that.
totally thinking of clustering it all here close to town, Crescent City?
Closer, not like in one zone.
Yeah, but-
kind of generally in this district. And then and going back to the idea of putting a space between the stores, so that you don't get
Yeah.
5 of them right there on North Crest, maybe 1,000 feet or something, or 2,000
Can't
feet.
see the legend there, but what are these, there's orange on this map that we're looking at right now. The orange and the yellow circles are how
Youth
big?
centers, these are 600-foot circles.
Okay, so that goes back to exactly what we've been discussing, and it absolutely does not wipe out North Crest when we talk the way we've been talking about putting in the north, what do we call it, corridor zone. If you change all of those circles, these two blue ones here in the lower part of North Crest, and then the
Right.
church, which have the blue and a red circle right next to each other, if those circles become the size of the yellow or the orange, it absolutely doesn't wipe out
Well, we're not,
virtually anything of North Crest other than a
we're not
little-
doing corridor zones, so that was like a bulk of the discussion last time with Joel, is all the problems with creating corridor zones, and we pretty much dropped that. That was why we're not done already. We
Okay,
were gonna
I
do
was
corridor
here for that
zones.
meeting, but I didn't get that we dropped the fact that we
Well, I
weren't
don't know that
doing
we
corridor
agreed to
zones.
drop it, but Joel shoots down all of our good ideas, so, and that was one of them.
Well, Joel's not here
That was
today, so
Joel's
we can
idea to
say-
begin with.
Yeah, and then he shot it down and said it would be too difficult, and he wanted to just have one setback and all of this, so we really
No,
got,
that's not at all what he talked about, and what I got from Joel. What I got from Joel was that you were saying that in the corridor zone, then we wanted to have density restrictions. But that goes against the idea of a corridor zone, because the whole idea of the corridor zone is that you don't want a density
well,
restriction.
it depends on your idea, which idea of the corridor zone you're coming.
Yeah, but
yeah.
that's two opposite ideas. The reason
Sure.
for a corridor zone
No,
is
I get
because you
it.
believe it
I
a
get
good
it.
place.
I get it.
And so that's what he was shooting down, that I got out of the last meeting, was that you wouldn't put a density restriction
Sure.
on top of a lowered
Right, well, to me, that doesn't make
corridor
sense.
opening.
So,
I mean, can
let
everyone?
me weigh in for a second, because
Yeah.
I actually have to agree with Kurt, because I did watch that, and that's kind of the gist that I got from Joel, was that he didn't agree with the density, compiling the density into the corridor zone.
Sure, no, I
It does
agree.
kind of conflict
Yeah.
with
That,
that.
oh, I agree with that. I'm not disputing that. But I think we all agree that we don't want 5 stores right there on North Crest. So regardless of how the idea was, we can all agree practically that we don't want high density there.
Yeah,
right?
but I think that that's going to be mandated by the people and by the store itself. I mean, they used to open 7 grocery stores in Crescent City. How many do you see now?
Well, part of our job, like if we're not talking about any of that, then we don't even need to have these meetings. Then we just open, you just do like Bob Berkowitz did and said no restrictions, and you just open it up and you just put them anywhere in the commercial zones. But that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to put some real restrictions on it and not just leave it to the open.
I think we're having a different discussion though than these circles.
Sure.
The discussion that you're really wanting to talk about, I think, is
trying to simplify
is trying to
the whole
reverse
process.
course and talk about, do we want to just put a finite number on these stores and have an RFP process? That's basically the area that we're going toward. We
no.
initially went away from that.
I'm
and
going
said that
away
we want to
from
talk
that.
about this sizing.
Like I'm talking about a third option because we ran into so much problems on the last meeting. I'm talking about a third option. It's not RFPs and it's not huge setbacks around schools. This third option is where we shorten the setbacks from schools, but we widen the setbacks between the stores so as to limit density. Does that make sense?
So then
far?
then you can still have the corridor.
Okay, they can have a corridor.
But if you want density, the density should apply everywhere equally.
No, less density, that's fine.
Because if you're going to put a
That's
density
fine.
component
That's
into
what I'm
it, it
saying,
can't be
everywhere
specific
equally.
to the corridor.
That's what I'm saying, everywhere equally. A space between the stores, everywhere equally, so everything's the same, and we can simplify the ordinance.
So,
If
like-
we want to have corridors, that's fine. I think this idea will work without corridors, which makes the ordinance more simple per Joel's request. Joel was willing to entertain the idea of corridors, and he said it wasn't off the table, but I don't think that it's his first choice. Joel, I think, seems to lean toward what's more simple. I wish he was here to weigh in, but I don't know. So anyway, I think it's different. It's kind of a third option that is a different method of limiting the number of stores.
And this would also be eliminating any potential retail outside of the Crescent City area? Because that, I don't know if that was something that we discussed when Joel was here.
No, not at all. Yeah, and I wasn't saying necessarily the Crescent City area, but just eliminating a couple of the outlying areas where that's generating some concern. It doesn't, so if we're trying to have one setback that's consistent, we're seeing that that doesn't work, okay? In places like Fort Dick or Gasky, you can have a 1,500-foot setback because not much is interfering. But here, a 1,500 setback doesn't work. And Joel was pushing for one consistent distance everywhere. And that's what I'm trying to figure out if that's possible.
So could you walk us through the zones or the areas out in the county that would be kind of the no-go zones? And, you know, obviously Klamath could be included in that.
Sure.
Fort Dick, Smith River, whatever that may look like.
Sure. I just think in the interest of simplifying this project, I mean, we really can see that like simplicity is gonna make this a lot easier. And it's easier to add things than to take them away.
So is the idea then to reduce the state like to eventually get to a point where we're talking about reducing what the state puts on?
Yeah,
Like 600 foot?
Go with
and
state
then-
standards or even less. If one dispensary is 560 feet and we're saying as a community that that's a perfectly acceptable dispensary, then why do we need more than that? I think that's valid.
Maybe, but I would have, that would be a whole different topic of conversation if we're actually going to reduce
Well, let's
the
do that right
state
now. Let's have that
mandated,
conversation right now.
the state mandated distance.
So you wanted to see the outline, Blake, what we were talking about? It's just the different zones. It's here. Oh, okay. Yeah, south, Klamath, where was some available commercial zoning. Gasky out here, Hyuchi. And then north, Smith River, Fort Dick, and then up by the state line.
I got a
So-
question for Sheriff Stevenson again, which kind of relates to what we're talking about, the outlying areas. What's your general response time average to, say, like Gasky, or Smith River, or Klamath? You know, one of those three areas that we've got where we can come in from 101 South, North, and 199. Generally.
It all depends. If you have, like I said, with the lottery, just giving what you have to do. If you're near, if you're in the Crescent City, anywhere from the South Beach through, say, to the Dr. Pine Bridge, you have but we have, a partnership with the Colorado Indian tribe that has, more enhanced exposure to the Smith River now. And
So then I guess my question would be, so with an agreement between the Sheriff's Department with the Tolowa Nation and a generalized agreement with the Yurok tribal police, I mean, is there any purview and ability for, say, the tribal police to step into something? I mean, I don't know if that's a question that we could answer as a group, but maybe, you know, Joel would be somebody. Yeah, I mean, if what we're thinking of with this is that, you know, our response time from the, yeah. So.
I can answer that question.
Yeah.
We're frequently, we have a program where we're putting tribal police through a training to get them cross.
Awesome. Are you working with the Tolowa Nation at that point too, or is that something you guys would consider in the future? So do you see that as being an asset to the Sheriff's Department with potential like response time or responses to cannabis or any other type of county issue?
Very, very much so. An example would be that, Klamath is probably the furthest jurisdiction to respond to. And if we have, say, an estimate that's occurring in Klamath, we'll call your tribal police, and if they're not handle it sometimes, at least get a handle on things while we're responding.
Does the Yurok police then back charge the county for any response? Is that an incurred cost, or do they that's kind of an agreement that they've put together with the county?
Because it works, it's a good thing for them, it's a good thing for us.
Awesome. Well, that's good to know.
And it's a good thing for the
For sure, yeah. No, that's a good thing to know. I wasn't aware of that, and that's. I mean, that might be something we need to, you know, talk about. I mean, if we're considering getting rid of outlying areas because of so-called security, you know, problems, well, I just see that, you know, two of those could potentially be mitigated with, you know, a proper, you know, conversation between the Sheriff's Department and the Yurok and the Tolowa. So that leaves really, in my opinion, just one space that might be, you know, an outlying area that could be a potential long distance haul for the Sheriff's Department. That would be the 199.
The other
corridor.
consideration is to try to limit the number of stores. I think that's like our main focus here that we keep kind of
Yeah.
losing sight of, is that we're trying to limit the number of stores in
I
some
get that.
other way.
I do understand that, but I do think, I mean, there is this part of me that believes that, you know, an open market does tend to limit the number of stores.
That's why I was
Because
pushing for
this is
delivery. That was why
the one thing I
delivery-
do believe is that if you have a dispensary, say if there was one in, you know, in Smith River, the likelihood of another one opening up next door to them is fairly unlikely. Within the industry, I mean, you know, this is why California is so crazy, is because this local jurisdictional application from the state. You don't have a lot of, you know, competition with spaces. You want to get the space, but if somebody opens up before you, the likelihood of you wanting to move forward with opening up another spot right next door within 600 feet is fairly unlikely because of the competition.
Sure.
Especially when we're in a smaller community like this. I mean, you know, if we were in a larger metropolitan area, we're going to be dealing with store after store after store because there's 1 million people they can serve. We've got 20,000 people to serve here, plus however many tourists come through the area. So I don't know if we should truly be worrying about limiting the number ourselves, but just again, getting back to what we had begun at the beginning of these meetings, was trying to put a space and a generalized platform together that basically works itself out. And that's the simplest form that I can see, is letting a fair and free market work itself out to a point. Because I truly don't believe, from a business standpoint, that you're going to have, you know, 25 retailers crowding into Del Norte County to open up shop.
Sure, yeah,
Trust
we're
me,
not
I've been
talking
working on
about
trying
that.
to get people to be
Yeah.
involved here, and it's really
Yeah,
tough.
I don't think we're worrying about that, and we could put a number between them if we wanted to, but the board is not comfortable with not having a mechanism for limiting the number, period.
Right, and I think,
Politically, to make this happen, the board wants to see either a number, a cap, or some, you know, solid mechanism by which the
Right.
stores can't open, other than just that they're not going to because there's too much competition.
Well,
That's not enough for the board yet, I don't think.
I agree with that, but I do believe that there is something that the board should probably investigate
too. Again, you know, I mean, I think that we are here to give broad-based recommendations to them so that they can kind of figure it out.
They're not going to figure it out, though. They're not going to
Well-
do anything with anything broad-based.
Well, I mean, yeah, but that's a personal opinion. I mean, and
That's
truly, it is a
totally
personal
personal,
opinion.
but
That's what
all
you
the
feel.
opinions here.
Well, that's what you feel. And I did watch the other board meetings, and I do know that there is some concern on their end, and there was some, you know, there was a particular supervisor who had mentioned that there might be some dysfunction within our board, which I don't truly agree with, because I think, just like Blake had mentioned earlier, we had all started at opposite ends of our spectrum, and we have now gotten to a point as a group where we're fairly centered and focused on what's best for our community. I don't think that we should get bogged down in the details of trying to limit the number completely, because I don't think that's possible. I mean, I really think we're just going to get ourselves caught up in this space, and we'll be here for 2 months trying to figure this out.
Yep.
Well, who's going to figure that out then? That's my question.
That's what we're here for. And that's what we're trying to do.
I
We just got
Isn't
bogged
that-
down at the beginning of this meeting talking about something that didn't, to my opinion,
But
have much
Eric,
to do. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and I virtually agree with most of it. The point that you're missing is we still have to give some parameters.
Yeah.
Right? So
Totally. And I guess that's what was my questioning to Sheriff Stevenson was, you know, we started this conversation, this meeting out about talking about getting rid of the outlying areas because of response time. But after having questioned Mr.
Right.
Stevenson, we actually have an agreement with
Right.
the Yurok
So-
tribe on one end. The north end, we have an agreement with Tolowa. So we're dealing with one space.
So let me just give the other side of that, right?
Please, yeah.
Okay, so that's one point of view, not that, I mean, that's.
It's a
the
very
sheriff-
valid point of
that- absolutely, a very valid point of view, and it's also one way to look at it.
Yes.
Now, we also have the situation at the last couple of meetings where Yuroks have weighed in and said, you know, they would like to be a no-go zone down there. And, you know, so this plays into that. And then you just brought up a point, well, no, we can kind of force it in a situation on that. No, let's, I'm liking.
I
that
wasn't
we're-
trying to force them. I was
Right.
just relaying what Mr. Stevenson had mentioned about an
My
agreement
point
between
is,
the Yurok police.
as we move through this process, we need to be going in order, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yes.
of some sort, and checking boxes as we go that, oh, we just solved that problem, and that one solves 2 or 3 problems or situations. So let's kind of agree that, wow, Klamath can be a no zone. That makes sense, right? Let's talk about state lines, Smith River, Fort Dick.
I agree.
If that's a yes or a no, and then we don't have to go back and kind of re-argue our original points.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I agree. I guess I just got a little confused as to our starting point with the meeting because it was brought up, there was a conflict about, you know, security measures on the outlying
There was a lot of
areas,
talk on
so-
the delivery that you missed, and that's part
Yeah.
of what led to this,
Okay.
the concern. It's not just about response time. The sheriff, you know, genuinely is concerned about security issues with delivery.
So,
And I think that
yeah.
it's a similar discussion. The same reasons that he gave for security with delivery are similar reasons with security with a place that is in an outlying area. It was just an idea and
Right,
thought.
but there is a big difference between security for a delivery driver and say a standalone
Sure, but
building
nonetheless, they
retail.
both take resources, and that is what the sheriff was getting at. It's resources, I think, public safety and resources.
Absolutely. I just don't think we should get
public
bogged down
comment,
with, you know,
please.
conflicting delivery
Sure.
security measures with retail building measures, because I think they're two separate issues.
Public comment, please. Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Ellie Hoops, with, Associate General Counsel for the Yurok Tribe. Just wanted to say, as far as that partnership, it is true, and we do have that. But when you come down to felony response, that still really does fall on Del Norte County. We may be able to respond to some degree, but I would say that if there was a real problem, it would be something you would still have to be concerned about the response rate on. As was mentioned, you know, they do respond to domestic violence and things like that, but that oftentimes is a misdemeanor matter. It's a little bit different than what could occur under these circumstances. And then in addition to that, because of some of the impacts of opioids as well as cannabis industry, the tribe is partnering right now to work with trying to put together a action plan really to try to remedy the drug use in the vicinity. And so and we're doing that in part with the counties but also, and the state, but also with the feds. And so keeping it a ban zone is really, at this point, what the tribe would prefer. So that aside the response rates, which I think are, you know, applicable here, even with the partnership, also there is the sort of the stuff that is currently actively occurring around the tribe. So, you're welcome.
Yeah, you were trying to point out, I think, Jesse, that you're getting the feeling that the Board of Supervisors is really trying to put a number on these stores, right? Was that kind of the
Yeah, they said
general
that at
gist?
several
They've
meetings. Put a number or limit.
They've said that and they've implied that, but, you know, I've even heard it from Blake and from everybody at one point, at least in this discussion, is that we're not really thinking that putting a finite number on this is exactly the way to go about it. This is
Right.
hence the way we're doing it. And so the board can hem and haw and kind of just talk around the subject all they want. The recommendation so far from this board is not to do that. If the Board of Supervisors wants to actually do something and stand up and say, we are putting a number on it, the Board of Supervisors has decided that, then we go forward with that.
Sure, I agree. We don't
know.
need to deal with that. Yeah, if they want to deal with putting the county in the position of having to sort through an RFP process and all of the pitfalls that county council has described with that, and they want to force but I think they recognize that that is not the best choice. That's an option, but I think the board fully recognizes, and they've said it, that that's not an option. They recognize our mission here of trying to limit the number of stores without picking a number and forcing an RFP process. So that's the whole point of what we're doing.
I think
So-
the next best step in helping you or helping us to try to limit the store number would be to potentially talk about it in between business.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. That's
That would
exactly
make
my
a
point.
huge difference.
Right, so
in
we
doing
had
that. I
scrapped
have no
that
problem with
idea, we had
going
scrapped that
through
idea
discussion.
and gone with the huge setbacks from sensitive distances, and now I'm saying, let's go a different direction. Let's limit the number by putting big spaces between them and not focusing on putting huge distances from sensitive areas. And part of that reason is a lot of these sensitive zones, the schools, for example, are already safe because they are a great distance from the commercial zoning. And so that's why I think this is an easy way to simplify this ordinance in the interim, not permanently blocking outlying areas, but just for the year. I don't think it's going to hurt anybody to go 1 year without having dispensaries in outlying areas. Come back and revisit it. We need to get this thing much more simple. You know, I make things complicated in all areas of my life, right? The things that I do in my career as a machinist, things are very complicated. And if you don't get the details right, nothing works. That's my world, right? But not everything is like that. And this isn't the end-all be-all. I'm not building a machine that needs to last for 100 years and be done right the first time.
Yeah.
This is a simple thing that only needs to last it just needs to get this kicked off. Get rid of the ban, get it to the end of the year, and then we can make adjustments. So I really want to push for a super simplification, even if it means restricting a little bit of access, restricting a little bit of numbers of location, and just make this simpler. That's kind of my general
Yeah,
thing.
and what you're saying right there, I hear that exact argument could be applied to the specifically, you know, word for word about keeping the buffers the way they are. The one thing I've heard over and over from county council is you can't, it's much harder to
Rein in.
rein it in once you've made it too small. And so I'm really not on board with deciding all of a sudden that all these circles need to be 500 feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be all of a sudden.
Blake, do you have any suggestions to,
Yeah, just 1 second.
you know, we all agree with Patty's Place, we're not really supposed to make a decision. I guess we're a thoughtful board. The supervisors can make their decision. We're vetting it all out in public, so people can pick it apart and figure out if there was some you know, something that doesn't work legally. You know, do you have, we've talked about corridors, we've talked about reducing the setback grandfathering. County council says that's probably not a good idea. Do we have any other ideas for Patty's location? I mean, you know, we want to move forward,
yeah.
you know.
It's not just for her. It's
Right, and we have to be careful not to just make rules that, you know, specific, and so, right, I'm aware of Patty's situation. I'm not familiar with the physical location and all that, because I
Here,
just,
it's
I
right
don't
here. I'll
really.
show you on the map.
Yeah, it's been pointed out to me, I just don't know town that well. I don't look, I don't
Yeah. I'll
come
show
to
you.
town very often. And so, I think that we're heading down the right path, Robert. I think we're kind of coming around from all angles, and to get to a point with, you know, some sort of compromised game plan that is genuinely accepted or generally accepted by all. I hope. So that's how I'm looking at this. And it sounds like we might have just found a way to potentially, you know, allow this situation with Patty's location to exist. However, and I said this before, you know, I don't want to make that a priority. I think that would be wrong for our community. And again, I apologize to Patty. That's not, you know, that could be an unfortunate circumstance. So we're trying, and we're making an honest effort. But Kurt just brought up a point that, you know, he's got thoughts now that we're making all circles too small. You know, curious to hear that, right? That would certainly be my position. But I like the idea that we're not concentrating and clustering 100%, but we're definitely having, you know, it's, well, you get it here, not over there. That's cool. And I do think that a component has to be a certain minimum distance between dispensaries, you know, to be determined later.
So here's on the map, so this dot in the big circle is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then you go north on North Crest, and this lot right here, see where the plus sign is?
Mhm.
That's the lot where the dispensary is. Now, there's every other school, every other spot, whether you have a big circle around it or not, you can't get you got the worship centers over here, but we already talked about that, right? We weren't going to have the giant circles around those. So the red dots being the circles, being the schools. The only other one is this one over here. It's close to some commercial zoning. So you could get within, you know, if say we had a 550-foot setback, you could get within that to here, but there aren't very many other places where you could get that close. Maybe here. That's already outside of that anyway. So it's
One of the things that we had talked about before, right, was that, and I can't remember, and I don't know specifically about the whole licensing aspect of it, but I can see that the state is going towards the kind of washing away medical, and it's all kind of becoming one entity eventually. That's kind of where the state's pushing this whole thing. But having a specific medical sales license now in this day and age is different than having, like, could you sell retail under a medical sales license?
Card holders.
yes.
Yeah.
And it's a state ID now.
Yeah. So like a commercial, what am I trying to say? Just open to everybody, retail dispensary, or not, retail location.
Recreation.
Is gonna have to garner a different license than someone who wants to say just sell medical.
It's truly the same license. It's
Yeah.
basically, and
Different
Robert
box to
probably
check.
would know a little bit more than I, but I think it's just the difference between an A and an M, and then as an adult use recreational retail, you can sell to anyone over 21 as long as they have an ID. And if you're a medical with the M on your application, you're limited to only sales to medical card holders.
So that's what I was
State-issued medical
getting
cards.
at was that we could potentially talk about different restrictions
For medical and adult.
For people who are just applying for this set license, right? Because
Yeah.
this, what we're talking about, is gonna be applying to specific licenses.
Yes.
Right? It's not gonna be, this is for retail, so this isn't for commercial,
Adult use.
this isn't for cultivation or manufacturing, this is specific to this. So this, eventually, in the ordinance, is gonna have to be specific to people applying under this specific license
I remember
request.
Joel having some
Yeah.
big problems with that kind of set difference, having different rules applying to which box is checked on your license.
See, I just,
Well, Joel has problems with everything I say too.
Yeah, but they're real.
at first Joel's suggestions to the board was, how about a trial program, you know, all these kinds of things that I think now Joel would maybe shoot down for us, you know?
Sure.
But, the medical use, it is a very different thing. I think that our community, the state has standards on advertising tobacco in windows and things like that. There's a difference from somebody who is trying to make a little escape from their life for the day or an hour or whatever, and a difference from somebody who is trying to treat an ailment. You know, there's a difference between a pharmacy and there's a difference between and I don't want to associate cannabis with alcohol, but an alcohol store, you know? And it's two very different things. One thing is something that we shouldn't be ashamed to show our children. Yeah, these people, you get old, you start aching, you need remedies, whatever. You know, one thing we're trying to say, we don't want our children being exposed to the visuals of an escape all the time, you know. I think that is a legitimate, you know, feel for the character of your town and whatnot, and that you would have a different parameter around a medical, you know, so totally. I mean, you know, if we're looking at the intention, it's two different intentions for this business. They're selling the same product, but there's, you know, I can't understand what the difference, what would be the big deal with having a different parameter around a medical dispensary as opposed to a recreational dispensary.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I would think it comes probably from what I understand, and this is a conversation I had with Joel about this a while ago, is that your license is for a year. What would prevent a license holder at that point from, you know, applying a year later for an adult use and throwing it, you know, basically Joel, from what I understand, has just been trying to minimize the amount of paperwork that the staff's going to have to go through.
An enforcement issue. That becomes an enforcement liability for the county. If they go and then apply for a recreational license and start selling recreationally a year later, then the county has to go and deal with that.
Is there
I don't know. I mean, it's doable. It's just it does add more work. That's all.
Jesse, is there a scenario where we don't have to worry about which type of sales are taking place? We just treat it as sales?
That's what I think we've been trying to go. I think that's the way that the county departments have wanted to go.
Yeah, I kind of thought that's already been determined. I'd check that box and say that's what we assume and move forward.
And as a hard time, also part of that was that discussion came on at length when we were talking about deliveries, and the idea was, okay, deliveries for medical only.
Right.
Okay, so what does that mean? How do we determine that? Who's checking ID? How are we sure that they're checking the card? Right. You don't even have to have a state card to sell medical. You only have to have that to get out of the sales tax.
Yes.
All you have to have is a doctor's card. Well, that can be forged. Are we checking? So there was a whole conversation about ascertaining whether it's medical or not. You know, and then you get a medical card when you don't even really have a medical reason, you know, so then you're back to where we started from. So. Yes, with delivery, that was for the concept of delivery, but then those same reasons extend to having medical only versus recreational only. How do you ascertain who the cards, and then again, you're not, if you're going that direction, you're not collecting the tax revenue because we don't have our county tax on medical sales.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Blake too, where I think, you know, that it could get a little difficult to do both. I think they should probably be under the same guidelines.
I mean, it'd be nice, and my fantasy of a super complex, you know, ordinance that fits here and does this and does that, and it's all different everywhere, you know, that'd be great.
I was just throwing it out there because that was just trying to come up with another idea. I mean, we all came to the consensus that we wanted to grandfather in these locations. We haven't exactly gotten feedback that that's not going to happen.
Right.
We've gotten that, I don't want to do it, I don't like doing it, but it's not necessarily been, the line hasn't been drawn.
I can tell you, I've had those discussions with Joel, trying every possible way that I could think of using all of my experience, and I've hit a wall. So
yeah, I think that we should accept that it's not.
And the other thing to remember about the corridors that we've talked about, still wanting these corridors, is another justification for the corridors is that if you look at this map we're looking at right in front of us, we're looking at the city of Crescent City. I can guarantee you right now, the city of Crescent City isn't going to go with these circles on this map. Because there's nothing left in the city of Crescent City, right?
Right.
And so they're going to be a smaller circle, and that justifies the reasoning behind the county to place corridors on North Crest and the 101 area that we talked about right here.
Why not
because
just be
that correlates with the other ordinance in place for the surrounding accompanying properties. It'll be correlate, and that might be a good thing for the corridor to duplicate whatever the city eventually takes up, and we would do something now and eventually maybe change it to whatever the city's ordinance is in those locations.
I mean, from what I understand, the city's staying with the state minimum setback requirements for everything.
So why not just be more in line with the city, be consistent with their setbacks everywhere? I think, didn't Joel reiterate that having a different setback in the corridor, it should be the same setback everywhere? Then what's the point of the corridor? Did I miss something? So, density consistency. Okay. Okay.
If we want to talk about density,
Sure.
density component that spreads across the county, I think that's maybe a good conversation to have.
Okay, if you want to have a different setback in the corridor and have a consistent density, pick a decent sized number to help limit the stores, and then, I mean, that's fine. That works too. I mean, to me, the idea of the big circles is making people feel good, but when you look at it, there aren't any big circles that are doing anything. If you take these circles away, it's almost exactly the same. The circles are in areas where there's no red or purple. And so really, when you look at it like that, you go, well, the circles are just making people feel good. Public comment.
So I'm assuming that the red zones are zone commercial.
Yes.
So can you pull up a map of the city like where we're at right now?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
let me
scroll
unzoom
down.
out a little. And that's the whole thing. So we're like right here. Where
Okay.
are we? We're
I just kind of want to get a physical feel of how far 2,000 feet is. That's
the circles are 1,500 feet.
These circles on this map are 2,000
Yeah.
feet, and we're not
Are
actually
they?
going with 2,000 feet, is what
Oh,
we
right.
talked
okay.
about the
So
last
that's
time.
2,000
that's
foot
just your so
Yeah.
you can visualize, you know, the 2,000 foot marker
Yeah.
versus
Yeah,
100 foot.
I think we've
mean,
talked
that's
about, I think we
half a
came up
mile.
with, what would we talk about last meeting? We were kind of commonplace with about 1,500 or something like that.
Yeah.
At the,
Well, they're saying 1,500 feet from a property line, but that then amounts to perhaps 2,000 feet,
feet in a
depending on.
circle.
on some of them.
And this
Right.
also if you were going to have that kind of distance between the stores, it's a good visual reference to see the density. If you had 1,000 feet, then this is the density map for stores too. You can see you couldn't have very many.
Gotcha. Okay.
which additionally, Robert, the smaller circles are 600, but that's a circle again, right? So.
The yellow?
Yeah, the yellow circle is a
Yellow and orange are
600-foot
600.
circle, and that's the line that the state puts on everything, but that's a different line, right? Because it's property line to property line. So in reality, the 600-foot way it's measured is probably more closer to an 800 or 1,000-foot circle.
Right.
Because it's a line to line, it's not a circle from a center point, so.
So, and then the red dot and the blue dots are what, worship locations?
Yeah.
And the red dots are schools?
Yeah. And
So you've got 1, 2, 3 schools covering North Crest.
the worship
and a worship
locations,
center.
we weren't doing a hard line on those. Those are going to be sorted out through use permit process where the community gets notification and gets to come and
Planning
protest
department,
and
all
all
that
that.
stuff.
Planning department gives special deference to churches already.
But there could be a few of those, we haven't vetted all of that there could be components of those blue dots that actually would fall under a different
Oh, if they have a
hardline
youth
category,
center,
like a
right,
youth
if they have
center
a
or
youth
whatever.
center or whatever.
Okay.
Which is fine to be smaller, but
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking, we don't really have a whole lot of commercial space available.
Sure.
And then with those circles being that
yeah,
big, if
you
those
can
are gonna
take
be
the
the
blue-
setbacks.
The big blue circles out, but that's what I'm getting at, is that there's so little of it that I think we could achieve what we're trying to achieve by putting the buffers between the stores, large buffers, and then
Sure.
be realistic about the buffers from these sensitive zones. And
Right.
So the purpose isn't
Right now,
to get,
highly likely, the North Crest south of Washington
Mhm.
is completely open. These circles wouldn't apply there.
Okay.
Right,
Those
right
blue
here.
circles are probably not exactly
Sure.
encompassing those locations. The same thing with 101 over by the Renner Station. That's probably
Over
all
here.
free game, and there's no actual
Right.
hard line off of there.
So
The
if you
real
put-
issue here on the North Crest corridor becomes north of Washington.
North of Washington.
And that's a
right.
2,000-foot circle on there, but we're potentially talking about maybe going down as small as 600 foot, which would actually only X out, like, let's say, half of that area.
Right.
sure. And I guess my idea with
2,000
having it
feet is
consistent
a lot.
everywhere and not having a corridor to make things more complicated is the fact that we don't have schools, that where we need that, other than up in the Fort Dick area. And I thought if there's some resistance to having stores there anyway, then why don't we just say, well, let's not do it there right now, That's all I was thinking. We don't
Yeah,
need
is-
to have stores
is-
all over the county in the first year. Like, the stores that we have sufficiently work for now.
Right.
It's not gonna kill anybody to leave it the way it is for the year.
They've been there for almost a decade. They
Yeah.
haven't harmed anybody. I was just kind of curious why we weren't letting the zoning kind of take care of itself, and then like you said, just put like a distance between,
That's-
hey, you can't be within 300
That's
feet
what
of
I'm
a store,
thinking,
and
yeah.
that's it.
The zoning
Like-
could take care of itself and
Because
density
all that
between them.
protected area, even up in the in
Right.
the upper areas, like Gasky, I know that the church is not going to have a problem
Sure.
across the airport.
Sure,
You know, at the market area.
right.
You know, there's a little tiny strip of commercial property. There's a little tiny strip of commercial property. We really don't have a whole lot of commercial property available. So
None of the Gasky property, kind of what we're talking about, would probably be inflicted,
Sure.
impinged at all on these circles.
So when you
It's
come
just
up,
because again, the blue circles aren't exactly going to end up being hard lines on these,
Okay.
on these. on
yeah, because I
these
just noticed
ordinances.
like the Gasky one, that, you know, we had the one church that's on Gasky Flat Road, and then it kind of encompassed the entire. There were two that kind of overlapped, and I think Gasky Market was the only one that was like kind of in between them. It's a good setup for her.
so
but-
here,
Okay. It's specific to the ordinance.
on the Fort Dick map here, we have the circle taken out, the commercial zone, the big circle. We could just say, don't have it up here, and it doesn't matter, make any difference, you know? That was my idea. Just don't have stores spread all over to begin with.
And that was the concern with the response time for sure.
Well, I guess it's like a
Yeah.
reason. It's like another reason, you know? We're trying to come up with sideways reasons to limit the number of stores.
Right.
Honestly.
Okay.
So I don't know, maybe the number of stores is, I mean, that was, after the last meeting, I was thinking, well, forget about it. Let's not worry about making it our job to limit the number of stores. If the board wants to pick a number, then let them, you know, and move on. But I don't think I don't think we need to put them in that. I think there's
So,
a
yeah, if you want to
solution that
reduce,
doesn't
if we want to
force
reduce
that.
the buffer zones, then we talk about putting in an area between stores, and then,
Right.
because that's kind of where we've gotten with these numbers, is because we all sat down and decided we didn't want
Right.
a density component, but if we
Right.
do, then that's fine, let's put a
Right.
density component in there, and maybe reduce these circle sizes slightly,
Sure.
that we're talking about, and
So are we thinking about reducing these circle sizes to say like 1,000 feet and then putting like 1,000-foot buffer in between each store? Well, the state standard's 600 feet. Yeah.
All right,
So if
I'm-
we wanted to be greater than the state, 1,000 foot would be a nice round number.
So
and
we're
then-
just basically acknowledging that the dispensary on North Crest is not in an appropriate location? That's what we're saying then, right?
Well, but it's
That's-
not
that's the
necessary,
whole
I mean,
point of this, is
we
that-
are trying to work for Patty as best as we can,
No,
but
let's
we
not do
can't
that. Let's
create.
not do that. Let's not work for Patty.
Well,
Let's
no,
not do
no,
that. That's
no,
nothing
you
to do
misunderstood,
with
okay,
that.
please allow someone to finish speaking
Sorry.
before you decide what they were going to say.
Sorry, Eric, I
Thank you.
apologize.
Yeah, definitely. We have tried to do this with the thought that, an existing medical dispensary who has been here for quite a long time and has done a very wonderful job for the community, how do we help that situation? But it does appear as though we may not be able to do that because we can't have one standard for one place and then separate standards for
That's
anyone
exactly what
else.
I'm saying. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm not saying that. I think that I'm saying the opposite. It is not about doing something nice for Patty. It is not about considering that. It is, forget about that at all. We have a fact here that we all agree on, that dispensary is appropriately set back. Period.
Okay, so then with that
I
mindset,
know,
then
let me
if we
finish.
say it's, okay, sorry.
Thank you. We all agree that dispensary is appropriately set back at the distance that it is right now.
also are in agreement with in the county that we can't control that dispensary either. We can't say you must stay like this, because if they change the way that their
Sure.
business model is,
Sure.
we're all sitting here and saying we don't really
Sure.
think that's appropriate necessarily. And so
So
that's where we're stuck at with that. We have no control of
Sure.
that.
So
And
that's
you
the
thinking that
gamble we take.
can-
That's the gamble that we're willing to take or not what we're willing to take, but what we're exploring is that if we reduce setbacks to meet a store, because we have a store that we all agree is in an appropriate setback, in the way that it operates now. And now, if what we're trying to do is create a setback that's appropriate for the way any store might operate in the future, That's what you're saying is a different question. Now, that's totally different. Now, if we are genuinely are going to say that we don't have any control as a community how any store operates in the future, then I want a ban.
We
Forever.
have
I don't want any
control that we've
stores.
been given.
But that's not, I don't think it's the case that we have zero control in the community about how it goes. If we're really going to say that we don't have any control and, somebody, wants to make a complete mess of things and have a big sign, then I'm for 2,000-foot setbacks, and one store. Let's just be extreme,
And
I get,
ultimately,
but that's-
ultimately what you were saying also is that you are advocating for the county to put a buffer zone that's smaller than the state mandated size. And
Yes.
And that in itself is what I'm, I guess, saying that I don't think that's a good idea, at least to start out with in this county. You definitely, in my opinion, and this is just one person's opinion, we shouldn't be saying that let's get rid of all buffers, for example, or that we want a 100, 200, 300-foot smaller buffer than the state even puts out there as this is your starting point, nothing smaller than this.
Well, it doesn't say
right?
nothing smaller.
Well, it kind of does, but we've all decided that, yes, we do have the ability as a county to lessen it, but this is kind of like, here's the cut and paste. You don't do anything, this is your base restriction. And we're talking about making the base restriction even less restrictive, right? And that's where I don't think that you get any buy-in from the community and at a whole. And so all of this talk about we like this one store, we think this one store, the way it operates now, is appropriate. We have given our feedback to the county as how they accommodate that. Whether they choose to or not, that's their issue. We want to grandfather it in. We like it. We all sat here and agreed on it, every one of us.
No, we don't. We don't agree on that.
We don't like it?
No, grandfathering presents all kinds of massive legal issues that puts the
A
county
lot of
at
counties
risk,
have
and
done
we
it.
don't. Okay.
A lot of communities have done things that, our county council's saying that we shouldn't do. The city of Davis has the highest per capita population of doctors. As they have a good income base and they pay their attorneys well. And their initial program was that they would, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that we see evidence of other communities pursuing other directions, that we're hearing we shouldn't pursue. And I would think ones that would have ample legal counsel. And for instance, Davis put a 4 cap and they decided they wanted 1 per 15,000 residents. And they said they'd like 600 feet, but you know what, that could be decided by the planning commission if they thought that would work in the lesser circumstances, And so we've seen that happen. We've all decided, I think, that Patty's location makes sense. I think we kind of determined that 550 feet works. I think that we've got about a decade of evidence that 550 feet has been no problem. We've got some concerns with outlying areas and law enforcement showing up, which I could understand. My alarm probably will go off once a year or so. Just from a mouse going across the floor, that kind of thing happens.
So the dilemma with the Patty situation is that we like the way Patty runs it. We're cool with the location. We're okay with that and the distance. The part with writing a policy that may exist for a long time is that with that parameter in mind, we don't know about the next owner of maybe her business. We don't know about the next situation and wherever they may be. And that's why we kind of back up from that situation and, hope for the best for Patty's situation, but it's no longer our responsibility to solve that equation. We've got to write the big blanket policy that works for our entire community. And we've obviously made it really clear that we would suggest that gets grandfathered in. Of course, legal counsel says, oh, you can't do that. But there's a lot of things that can happen for quite a while Patty continues to run her business for the next 5, 10, or 20 years. So
Not if there's a setback that blocks it out, though.
It's a bit of a gamble. Well, it's a bit of a gamble. I got that. And she might have to relocate. I got that. I understand that. Those are all options, but it cannot be our worry here. We've got to move past this.
I think that it is our worry, though. That's what we're here for. I think that's why I was put on the board myself was I represented Del Norte Patients Together, you know, so we're representing a community interest, you know, and we are here to recommend a full ordinance, you know, to the Board of Supervisors. And there's all sorts of ways we can handle it, and we're not supposed to look like we're doing anybody any specific favors. But we have decided that 550 feet works, whether we want to say it as a conclusive statement or not, because we've decided that Patty's Place has worked there for all this time. And I could think of a number of ways, including a medical dispensary is a different dispensary, and it's not any less rigorously regulated than a recreational dispensary. You know, you're either going to risk your license, or you're not going to risk your license. You know, you're either going to do your due diligence to be sure that the doctor's recommendation is valid, and this person is able to shop at your store, or you're not. And that's the case with liquor stores. I remember buying a case of beer when I was, you know, 18 or so, and seeing my friend who looked like he was 14 come out with one, and sure enough, I went in and got one, you know. And that's just the you know, the risk we take. I think you're going to see a lot less of that in California's cannabis industry because of the very expensive, you know, for my organization because they give it to you, your fines based on how much your revenue is, and I'm on the bottom, the lowest tier, and it would be $8,000 per violation. So if they come in and, you know, 17 violations, you're just done. You know, you're not getting back up again from that, you know, so there's a lot of incentive for people to check, you know, and I think that's what we're trying to say, that medical is not different. It is a different ball field, you know.
I agree with you. I think that is one way to help solve the problem with Patty's situation. Is medical's different. It's worked for 10 years medically there where it is, at a 550 radius or a 600 radius. So medical could be different than recreational or retail. And I think that this board is given the responsibility to give information to another board, supervisors, and it's up to them, and it's been proven already that no matter what we say, they're going to change. And so we just need to come up with a broad base thing that works, and then let them handle it from that point. We can't sit here for an hour and not get through much except for everybody's feelings. And now that we've gone through everybody's feelings, we have not said one damn thing on how to finish and fix it. So we need to get off of everybody's feelings. If Joel's not happy with a medical and a retail recreational, so be it. He's going to write the law the way we tell him to write the law, and if the board doesn't like it, we're going to change it.
No, it's not.
Or recommend it.
The board has not changed anything that's come out of this group, just for the record. I'm not sure why you would say that the board changes everything that we say. We haven't come out a lot, but what has come out of here, the board is kind of gone along with. But okay, so back to policy when we're talking about, I have a question for Heidi. All of these will be use permits, which then goes to the planning commission. I went to a planning commission meeting where they were talking about a use permit approval. And it looks like the planning commission has the ability to block the permit if they want to.
That is correct. It's a discretionary permit, meaning
Absolutely.
it would need to be approved by the planning commission. It would require a public hearing. All the property owners within 300 feet would be notified by mail. We'd have the advertisement in the newspaper. We would post the site. They would have the ability to come to the planning commission meeting. If the planning commission choose to approve the project, the neighbors or whoever still have due process to appeal the decision of the planning commission to the board of supervisors and or the coastal commission, depending upon the location of the project.
So this gives quite a bit of discretion. A lot of localities use the planning commission to make adjustments to things like setback. If we pick a setback like 1,000 feet, the planning commission has zero power to reduce that, to say in this situation, in this exact and only situation, 1,000 feet isn't necessary, 550 feet is okay. They will not have that ability if we choose a hard line 1,000-foot setback. And since all these permits have to go through the planning commission and they don't have any obligation to vote anyway, I don't believe they even have to give a reason why they vote.
So-
They need to make findings.
They have to make
If they
findings,
deny
sure.
it. Generally on something like this, it would be incompatibility with the neighborhood or.
Sufficient
I mean-
neighborhood complaints
So-
could be a legitimate finding.
So with that in mind, we could have a policy here or a recommendation that says we recommend, 500 feet to
We can have a
1,000,
minimum, sure.
Or, so kind of like two options, 500 or 1,500, right? Whatever. And then the planning commission would have the discretion to
Mm-hmm. Right.
apply it.
I think how the ordinance would have a minimum. If we wanted to have a
Right.
minimum, the ordinance would just state a minimum, and then, or
Well,
it would state a number. and
I'm
then-
suggesting two minimums. Impose one.
Okay. I'm not sure how that works legally, if that works, but it's something that allows the planning commission
Yeah.
to reduce the setback. You can't, an ordinance doesn't have a recommendation per se, I don't think. It just has a number that's actions, the law. So if we had a
Correct.
low number, let's say we had 550 feet, right, as the statutory minimum. The planning commission can't say 450 feet. They can't do that. It's 550 feet. But the planning commission come and say, in this situation, it needs to be 1,000 because this church is coming and this people and these schools, or we need to make it 1,500. And I think that's a better way to do this because we can't pick a bunch of different setbacks.
Or your ordinance could have recommended buffer zones. Your
doesn't-
ordinance doesn't have to have
But why-
finite numbers.
Why even put that in there, though? Is that a thing, Heidi, to put recommendations that aren't?
I don't know. I mean, we have, that's an interesting question. I mean, most zone districts are very clear on what setbacks are for,
Right.
prescribed uses. We have what's called a planned community zone district, which the developer, it's usually a larger scale kind of thing. They can come in and, basically ask for what types of setbacks they
Okay.
want. But those are usually
Okay.
construction setbacks. It doesn't deal with
Sure.
setbacks to outside, off-site
Sure.
uses, so. I
So a
don't-
minimum and a maximum, that's sort of what you're saying. The planning commission couldn't block you out, say 2,000 feet would be the greatest the planning commission could ever block you out, say, so maybe put a range like that would be actionable numbers. A minimum of 500, a maximum of 2,000, the planning commission can play with it in there.
I
if
don't
that
know
works.
what Joel's going to say about
Sure,
this, but I
we'll
just
listen
have a
to
feeling
Joel.
he's going to say something.
Sure.
He
But
will.
just the general idea
Yeah.
of having the planning
Yeah.
commission make these decisions on a case-by-case basis, we've heard that from other members of the community, former employees of the county have said that it is a viable way to use the planning commission so that you don't have to have one big setback that's supposed to apply to all. The setbacks from the state were meant to apply, I think, generally to areas that have a lot more available commercial space. So you can have big setbacks that protect residential zones and schools that are mostly in residential zones. And you still have a ton of available commercial space that's fine. In this kind of a community, big setbacks aren't going to work. We're not going to have any commercial activity, which is fine if that's what we want, but I don't think that's what we want. So, yeah, I think study the maps. You see the maps. I never looked at these maps for very long on my own time. I look at them here while we're talking, but I can't even focus on them while we're talking and having a conversation. And I spent 2 or 3 hours quietly in the evening looking at these maps, and you see different things. You get a different sense of what we're doing. And I think that everyone should do that and decide if having big setbacks around the schools is even going to accomplish what we're trying to do. Having big setbacks between them seems a lot more, we're going to get a lot more of what we're trying to do. There's 2 schools. There's this one here, Seventh-day Adventist, and this one over here, and then up at Fort Dick, there's one that's kind of close but not. And Smith River, yes, right. So we're talking about just a couple of spots. And I don't know. And then the signage in terms of medical versus recreational, yeah, we can restrict it to medical, but they can still be obnoxious. It doesn't make any difference if they're medical only. They can still come in and have a big old sign and, do other things that are obnoxious advertising ways, So limiting it to medical doesn't give us a guarantee that we're gonna have a respectful business in the community. There's really no guarantee. The only guarantee for that is to just have a ban. So I think that we need to accept that we can't guarantee that we're gonna we're not gonna have to deal with the disrespectful business, and
I don't think there's
acknowledge that
anything
we
to do
can't
with
do that.
respectful or disrespectful. I think that the conversation
acceptable.
centers around physical advertisements or exposure to children.
That's what I mean by that word.
And so I have no problem with the way these businesses operate. It's just that we're in the conversation about proximity to
Sure.
children's congregation points is all.
Right.
You know,
So anyway, most of these points are far enough away from the commercial zones. I mean, you can see it. There are very few spots. So I'm just asking, is it really wise to have a blanket setback that's only going to apply to a couple of spots anyway? So I don't know. That's the thought. I've had 2 weeks to think about it. So.
the 600-foot, and then we keep talking about the same place over and over again. It's getting kind of old, but the church there that we keep talking about, where your cursor is right there.
Yep.
At least my conversation centers around applying a 600-foot buffer to that location. That's kind of where I've been focusing on.
It wipes out a perfectly located dispensary.
Yep, just barely. But it
500
also doesn't eliminate more than, let's say, a quarter of the properties on that stretch of North Crest.
How about 550 feet?
I personally have no problem with that. I have no problem with 400 feet in that location, but the state of California has thrown up these regulations in front of all of us saying 600.
I think you need to let
And
go of
we,
that.
as a community, would be saying, we're lessening this set restriction that the state has put in. I don't
So,
see.
we're allowed to do that.
I
think we
understand
need-
we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to put a facility right next to Crescent Oak School right here if we want to, too, as a community. But I don't see the buy-in community-wise, at least initially.
It's already bought in. The community
of
has
doing
already
that.
bought into a 550-foot setback.
But it's
Not with
also
these
a
new
medical
regulations.
only right now.
With what new regulation?
I just like to say, I mean, 550, we say it works that location, and clearly it does. But, I mean, from a land use perspective, in my experience working in the planning department, what goes for one location does not go for another place.
Exactly.
What might
Yeah.
fly in Gasky does not necessarily
Sure.
fly on Ocean View Drive or
Exactly.
Gilbert Way or
Exactly.
wherever, and it's
But what do you
just
think
something
about
to-
having the planning commission being that backstop, rather than picking one number for one size fits all, like as you just said? We can't have a one size fits all. What do you think about
I don't know, it's a lot of pressure.
a lot of pressure on the planning commission?
Yeah.
Like they shouldn't have pressure.
I don't know, I'd have to really think that through. I
Okay.
don't know.
But the existing one that we're talking about is a medical only, so what if we have a 550 feet for medical?
And 1,000 feet for adult use.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine.
I would be okay with that.
well, I mean, that gets over everything.
Except for the fact that what Heidi just said and what I've been saying is we don't know what the next medical owner
Yeah.
may look like, wherever that may be.
It's just feelings again, which
That
you told
part's
us about.
hard. And then, what if they want to cheat? What if they're not really just selling medical? How do we,
Well, that's a state-regulated type of deal they
Yeah.
can find, and
Well, now we're just back to
Okay.
feelings. We're just doing things to make us
Yeah.
feel good, and it doesn't
Yeah,
really
might
do
as well go by the
anything.
camp.
But Blake is right in the way that you address it. When we look at projects, we can't look at how it's currently being operated. We need to
Sure.
project down the
Right.
road.
The
changes
county-
of hands.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I agree.
The county ought to have an opportunity to review like an ownership change, I would believe, because it's a whole new license really if you're going to do an ownership change. And so I would think the county would have another shot at saying, well, this guy's ran 3 and, he couldn't maintain, I'm sorry. You'd have a chance to look at the person's background that was taking over the establishment.
That'll have to be in the ordinance, wouldn't it? Like, that'd be like a full RFP
Well,
process.
if the use permit was only issued for a year to follow the state license, then yeah, I guess that is correct.
The state has language, that actually pertains to ownership changes. When one entity sells to another entity, that license has to be reviewed again. They'd have to refile for that application, because that application is for that specific business.
But we couldn't
wouldn't be
decide, well, we don't think
Licenses are
this
actually
person
not
is as
transferable.
good, and now we're
Right.
going to do
They
600.
couldn't stop it, right? You
Yeah.
could review
I
it, but
mean,
you
that
don't
would-
have the power to stop
But
it.
licenses are non-transferable. So
Right.
so Patty's license, say if she had her license today, she sold it to Joe Schmo tomorrow, that Joe Schmo has to file for another license.
But there'd be no mechanism for the
But-
county to stop
But
that.
if we said countywide, 550 for medical retail sales, even if it does change the license, I don't think we could then say, well,
Right.
we don't think you're going to quite run it the same way. We're going to bump that up to
Sure.
600.
The planning
But at least
commission
you-
wouldn't, couldn't be justified in blocking it if it was
At least
there.
you could keep it medical instead of going to recreational retail.
I believe
Yeah,
there's
okay.
sufficient evidence that,
Yeah.
the medical's just gonna be a different thing. It's reduced clientele, you're really gonna have to appeal to that clientele. We've seen it in Oregon, they're disappearing, but they do offer a service that should be, valid and in need.
Isn't part of the permit process if it was to be sold, because they're not transferable, that you have to have county?
Yeah, local jurisdiction is the king of the
Right.
hill in
So
California.
you get local jurisdiction for any new business?
Yes.
So then it would have to go to the planning commission?
Yes, it would have to
and
go
then
all the way back through the
Whatever
process.
location was there would have to be approved.
Exactly.
Planning commission would let everybody within 300 feet of them know that it was happening. There would be a public hearing.
Yep.
You-
There would be
you've
a new
got
application for the
zoning
county.
and ordinance and a planning commission that's going to take care of 90%
process.
of what you guys are talking about.
Exactly. I think we've been, okay, so
Put a distance between them and be done with it.
every other locality that I've read about and watched, their planning commission is doing what we're doing right now. So, including Crescent City, and so they know the process, and so they're equipped to deal with these permits. Our planning commission is like AWOL on this project, and so, like, literally, I need to say it again, our planning commission is out of action here and really needs to be a bigger part of this process so that they can have a bigger role and responsibility in these permits. And I think the notion that they're going to be able to be separate from it and just rubber stamp stuff is pie in the sky. The planning commission has to be involved in such a sensitive community project. And I think that us trying to come up with numbers and rules that's going to work for every situation is ridiculous. We've been at this. Everybody's frustrated at how we're going around in circles. And I think that we really need to put some, and Bobby, you said several times, we need to put this on, the next board, but it's not the board that's going to deal with it. The board is not capable at all in handling these kinds of things. They look to the planning commission. Like when there's planning commission things, the board doesn't investigate anything in the planning commission. They don't read this stuff hardly. It's the planning commission makes a decision based on input from community development, and the board just accepts what the planning commission says. They don't go back in and open the whole can of worms and everything. They don't do anything like that, really. It's just like political policy and what's going to fly politically. The planning commission's doing all the groundwork, the hard work that we're trying to do preemptively before any of these permits have even come in. So it's like crazy. And I think it's
Well, the planning commission takes their recommendation to the board of supervisors, just like we are taking our
Yeah.
recommendation to the board of supervisors.
Sure.
And the planning commission is represented here quite heavily with Heidi. She's on the
Right.
planning commission, or you're in charge of it, or,
I'm staff.
okay. But,
the board accepts that with the planning committee. They don't go and half the time go, no, we're not going to issue that permit to this guy who wants to build his garage, even though they just rubber stamp the planning commission because they're doing the detail. And if the planning commission is not involved in this, then we're skipping the planning commission, and it's the working group and the board, and there's this whole
The
intermediary.
planning commission is going to be involved in it because whatever
Yeah.
comes out of the working group will be sent to the environmental review committee and then
Sure.
on to the planning commission, and it
Sure.
could change.
Certainly.
On the
think what he's-
personal
On the
ordinance, it kind of,
ordinances, on the ordinances.
that's correct.
Sure.
There was a little kind of different process that the personal use followed that will not happen
Right.
with any future ordinances.
Okay.
And just an FYI, as far as item number 3 on the agenda, will that be settled before noon?
Yeah, we should stop and do that if that's what we wanted. We should
Okay.
talk about it for sure.
I know that they'd like to be able to have that information to
Yeah.
report back to the board on Tuesday.
Perfect. So anyway, I think that having an ordinance that, we're trying to make an ordinance that basically lets the planning commission out of the process so that they don't have to do anything. We just have these setbacks, either it complies or it doesn't. And we're basically taking the planning commission out of the process. And I don't think that we can do that with this. I think that it's clear that the planning commission needs to have more responsibility for, as each, I'm not talking about the ordinance approval, I'm talking about as the permits come in for applications.
So.
Planning Commission needs to bear more responsibility with making sure that the setbacks are correct individually rather than us trying to pick
Right.
one that applies.
So
to
then how do
everyone.
we get to that so that we're not going around the table here?
Yeah.
Because I think that our job truly is to come up with numbers. That a general parameter of numbers so that we can get the ball rolling. So how do we get to a consensus as to how we direct that into the Planning Commission? Can we have, and I guess I'll point that, I'll ask all of us, does it seem reasonable to us to allow for medical to have a different setback than adult use? Does it seem reasonable to you, Blake? To have a separate setback for medical than, because what we just found out is that if, say, Patty, who's currently medical, say she gets her license under a 550-foot setback, but then next week she decides to sell to Joe. Joe purchases it. He then has to go through the whole application process through the Planning Commission and local jurisdiction and state again. If he wanted to change from medical to adult use at that point, he would have to go through that, and then he would be required to find a new location, because the location that, say, Patty's in right now is a medical operation, and that operation is at a 550-foot setback. So if Joe bought Patty's business next week under medical, he would have the choice to either, one, stay as medical in the current location that he's at, or two, apply for an adult use and find a new location. That would then, that seems to me like that's a doable thing. Like, we could have two separate setbacks for, one for medical, one for adult use, because the Planning Commission and the actual applicational process through the state and the county mitigates them changing that use. So I think that we could mitigate that way, because Patty can't sell to just anybody. She could sell to anyone, but they would have to take over that space, redo the whole application process, and if they wanted to, which was a concern, flipping from medical to adult, they'd have to find a new space.
So,
That makes sense.
I hear what you're saying. It makes sense to that point. So let's, my understanding of Patty's situation is there's no signage and attractiveness saying, come here, right? What if Joe decides that on his medical deal, he's gonna blow it up?
Okay.
A little guy out there with the sign.
Yeah, whatever it might be, right? Now, what are we doing to our community?
Right.
That's
But I think
that's
what we
the
have.
part that
yeah.
is hard to legislate, regulate from this point, at this point in time.
Right.
And so that's the part, so yeah, I would have problems with what your scenario. I hear you, it makes sense, but we can't assume that that's how it's going to work in the future
So-
and write an ordinance that allows something that we would be against.
Right. And so I guess my question then would be, how do we come up with a solution then? If we have all agreed that Patty's Place, and I'm sorry, Patty, to keep using your name, because I think that's not fair to you, because I think we're kind of throwing you around like a little bouncy ball. But you're the most obvious example that we have. There's already, we've heard from Joel that there's an inability for us to legislate or put any stop to what types of signs people would want to put up. So we have to throw the potential control of signage in any instance out the window. We don't have control of that. It's freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of advertising. That's the backbone of our community.
Right.
There are some limitations, absolutely. There are some. Sign size, they got to pull a
But you get my point.
I get your point.
If the current situation had signage and all this, and it was owned by somebody else, we wouldn't be happy with it.
Right.
So we wouldn't allow it.
So,
it's
but
the risk,
then I
right?
get the feeling then any signage in the county on any business would be a point of contention for a group of community members in our community.
Right?
I mean, and that's
it would
true.
be.
I think
It would be.
that's a true statement. And so we have to get to a point where we see the middle here. Again, Patty, I don't think, and I see your point entirely, because I do think that if Joe were to purchase Patty's Place and want to put big signs up there and a big green googly guy, I'd be dismayed too. But there are mechanisms in place that could mitigate that. I mean, if we have a use permit process, Patty, again, okay, Patty sells to Joe. Joe has to go through the planning and use permit process again. He has to actually bear to the Planning Commission all of his signage. I mean, all of his entire business operations have to be laid out in front of the Planning Commission. So at that point, the Planning Commission could look and say, man, that big green googly guy or whatever, I mean, those are, and then say a place of worship would have an opportunity You know, all the mechanisms for the community would be in place to
30
go to the
people
planning
show up
commission.
complaining about it.
Yeah, if people come up and complain, you know, there are mechanisms in place, I think, that could help to control and mitigate those.
And it only lasts a year, so he gets the place, he applies for a permit, it lasts for 1 year. Does a bunch of things that upset everybody.
Nuisance reports
Then the
on
next
file.
year, it's probably not gonna get approved by the planning commission.
I totally see your concern, though, because I think it's true with all of us. None of us want to see that type of advertising. But we do need to get to a point where I think we've got some hardline numbers.
Right.
But
And if-
the state already has regulations on advertising close to
Yes.
schools and
Right.
that kind
Yeah.
of stuff,
Yeah.
So you
so.
can make a whole different buffer zone around external advertisements, like.
Yeah,
like
off-site
Like
advertising.
off-site advertisement.
Right.
It's a
Absolutely.
whole different, there's a whole different realm we
Right.
probably should be putting
Right.
in this thing. Maybe we could actually
So
increase
if
those.
if we get to a point where we're on a consensus where we've got like, okay, we've got medical, which we all can agree is not what adult use is, and then we have adult use. What are two separate distances that we're okay with? Because, I mean, if I look at it, I mean, I know, like, you know, 550 feet is below the state recommendations, or at least their guidelines. But if we feel that for a medical establishment with minimal, I mean, we could put in place, I think, some language that would mitigate the medical advertising points. I mean, I'm sure Joel would probably have some sort of, you know, negative remark to that, but I do believe that there's a control there that maybe he just hasn't seen, or he doesn't want to get into that, but I do believe that there is capabilities for that. So if Patty's okay at 550, couldn't we be okay with all medical? If you're just going to be medical only, because again, our guidelines and our mechanisms for control is the use permit. And a changing of hands requires a complete business operational plan adjustment. And that has to be presented to the planning commission under the use permit. And that gives everybody an opportunity in the community to control changes.
And in addition, you just said, or a few minutes ago, that these will all be annual permits anyhow.
Yes,
right?
yeah, they're all,
So
everything
they're
has to be
annually
every year.
renewed, or
Yep.
reviewed, renewed.
Exactly, exactly.
And just, yeah, so you could have a larger number for recreational, or you trust the planning commission, you know, not to do it, either way.
Yeah.
We, as a community, trust the planning commission today on every decision that they make.
That's right.
So why do we not think they're gonna make the same decisions for medical or recreational
Sure.
marijuana?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think that's good. Democracy, right? The planning commission, they're appointed by the supervisors, and supervisors can get voted out.
I mean, what the planning commission considers are based on staff recommendations. So that's where it's going to originate. There's going to be an application filed, there's going to be a field review by various county staff. They're going to go out and look at it. They're going to make a recommendation. Then obviously when it gets to the public hearing, you know,
And if you
we're
get
going to have everyone
complaints-
who's going to comment on it, and that's where it will probably be adjusted.
Right, if you get
Based on
complaints of
feedback.
signage or,
I mean, I think for simplicity, it would be nice to have a number as a minimum.
I think that's definitely a minimum, but we don't,
So, I mean,
yeah,
so
I was
what
thinking
we're
not necessarily
thinking-
2 different minimums, I was thinking just one.
Okay, so we're saying 550 for medical, and we do not have a minimum for adult.
It would be either the same 550 or something different, like more.
I mean, it seemed
1,000.
like we had like 3 or 4 meetings where this is all we talked about, and we were
Right.
going between really large numbers, so
Right.
it feels like,
I think, yeah, I think that in consensus of everybody that I've seen on here, that 550 for medical, and we're at somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 for recreational. So everybody can give their opinion and let's get over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that doesn't
And or
allow
if we
the
wanted to
planning
come up with maybe a more, as opposed to just arbitrarily picking 550, like if the city or the county had an idea as to what the average city block was, you take, what's 2 blocks? 500?
Yeah, it's about 500 average. 200 foot for a
Yeah.
That could be a mechanism for picking that number that's not just an arbitrary number out of the sky.
Yeah, it's not arbitrary at all. It's an exact distance based on an exact example of a dispensary that's accepted by the community. It's.
Yeah, I was just playing the
arbitrary at
Joel
all.
role for a minute,
I
because he he has, so far, I've heard from him, don't make rules that are specific to a specific location, you make a rule in general, and so I was just trying to come up with an idea as to
Meaning that
why.
consistent everywhere.
Well, I think
Or that are
also,
trying to specifically grab a certain spot.
Well, yeah, you're saying if it's special to that spot. You can pick a number based on that special reason and then apply it everywhere. I think that's the point.
Well, I think that we keep saying 550 for medical because that's where Patty's is again. Sorry, Patty, for this bouncy ball, but 550 works for the medical, and I think we need to figure out a distance for the recreation retail. I believe, and I may be totally wrong, and you guys can have your opinions, but I believe a recreational retail outlet will have 3 to 4, if not more, times visits than that medical will. So that medical one is going to be a nice, quiet, little private thing at 550. And you're going to have a Walmart at a retail recreational.
I hear your
So
point.
a bigger spot would make more sense.
I hear your point. It was just an idea of like letting the planning commission make that decision on a case-by-case basis. So let's say you had a retail, or you don't like that idea.
Well, I just think that, we picked the number of 550 as a minimum because of a certain location right now. Let's pick a retail recreational number as a minimum.
Okay, 1,000 feet. Okay. Perfect.
Then we'll have to argue with Joel again about the medical thing, because we kind of went over that a little bit. He wasn't crazy about that. We kind of discussed that earlier this meeting, but I still think it's completely applicable, and I don't know what.
It's fine. If it'll make people happy, then I'm cool with it.
Well, that's all right. He has to cry once in a while in his life.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is lawyers will pick apart everything. It's part of their backbone. It's their
Well, it's their
detail.
job. That's his
Yeah,
job
it
to
is
do
their
that.
job.
He'd be failing his job if he wasn't doing it. So.
So I would just suggest that we leave this meeting and close out here so we can move on with, say, the 550, and today 1,000, and 1,000 between dispensaries.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Let's throw out some numbers there. 1,000 foot between.
So we've got
at
3
least.
numbers.
Right.
We're not settled on them quite yet. We'll pick it up at the next meeting or whatever, but at least so that we've got, a semi-motion on the floor, if you will, and so we don't talk in circles anymore. And I'm one of those that wants to think through that 1,000 or kind of look at it. It might need to go up, but that's all.
Yeah, I think we should all look at the maps now that we've got a generalized, idea, okay, 1,000 foot, and see what that does for us out in our spare time, because that, I think you're right. We need to reconvene again, but at least it seems like we might be on a better track to, to have some solid numbers.
So you're looking at a set of maps that would be 550 and a set that would be 1,000?
Just just this one that's on the screen right now.
Just the Crescent City urban area?
Because
Okay,
Smith
now,
River, Gasky,
now,
and Klamath aren't changing.
which activities? Would that just be for the youth centers and for the schools?
Schools
Just
and
those 2
centers,
uses,
correct.
not the
And
churches?
block out Crescent City.
Okay, block out Crescent City, which I had written down. Okay, so we're going to block out Crescent City. We're going to go 550 from youth centers and schools, and 1,000 from youth centers and schools. Okay.
And that'll help us to see the distance between them with that
And
1,000 foot
it's
circle.
just the
We can-
Crescent City maps.
Yeah, that's enough.
Gotcha.
And we can use our imagination for the other
Okay,
ones.
yeah, we can do that.
Okay, super.
So can we go to
Okay,
number 5?
yeah. Skip number 2. Number 3, appoint Vice Chair Blake Alexander as chair of the working group and elect a new vice chair.
I want to know
We're gonna
what the
talk about
reasoning, what's the reasoning behind all of that?
Okay, yeah, where do we start? Blake, you want to start? Or should I start? It was my idea, so I can start.
Sure, I'll start. It certainly was not my idea. Don't really need this on my resume. I'm not worried about resumes, though. So Jesse called me a couple weeks ago, had some concerns with where the board was, what else was happening kind of in town and in the neighborhood.
Which board, our board or?
Supervisors.
Okay.
And so he explained to me a few things and asked if I would be willing to step up as chair. He thought that there's a little controversy that would settle down if that happened, and he could announce that. And I said, not really. Yeah, maybe. I still need you to do the work. I still don't want you to do the reports. And so anyhow, that's where we left it, and I think a day or two later, we were literally here in this room at the next Board of Supervisors meeting together, where he announced it, and I followed him, kind of nodding yes, saying, and backing it up, that I would be willing to step up and do that, and so we've kind of already made this public announcement that we expected to go in this direction. And Jesse, you can maybe explain the whys if you want.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it at all. I thought we were all kind of going the right way. I don't like the extra workload that I'm doing, but I'm happy to do it. I think that this board will function the same regardless of who's sitting in the center seat. I'm tasked with writing the agenda, but I don't do anything other than just the next thing that the group wants to talk about. So let's see, with that being said, yeah, I'm not sure how to talk about this exactly, but.
So you say that the board will function, this little board right here will function the same. Is that because you're going to maintain doing exactly the same things you've been doing? Because in my opinion, what you've been doing on this little panel is an absolute necessity for this panel. I cannot see this panel functioning to get the things done that this whole community wants done by the end of the year without you doing what you're doing, Jesse, in my opinion. I mean, there's nothing towards Blake. I couldn't do what you're doing. I don't think anybody else up here necessarily can do. So if you're saying the board, this little panel is going to continue to function the same way, I'm thinking that you're implying that you're going to continue doing all the same things you've been doing. You're going to continue going to the board meetings and reporting every 2 weeks. You're going to continue.
If I'm vice chair, that's what Blake wants me to do.
And so, yeah, I guess I fail to see as we sit in this room, I fail to see the reasoning behind all that, but maybe there's some ulterior motives that are being derived from
We're not hearing it.
Yeah.
Potentially
Well, I'm trying to figure
Board
out
of
how to say
Supervisors
it,
or something.
And I'm under the clock
Let
here,
me
so.
just respond to Kurt there, and those are fair and valid points. Here's the deal. I think I can run these meetings slightly quicker and stick to task and check things off. Not because Jesse's not doing a good job. He's doing a great job in representing us and all that. We are all just one group, and I'm with Jesse. It doesn't matter who's sitting in the center room, or center seat. So I'm just saying I can run a meeting. I've done a lot of that, and we'll just stay on the agenda and we'll follow through, and I'll represent my side of the issues when I have to, and it's not because I want to get in that chair to control or dictate any direction. Absolutely none of that. Zero.
You don't like this chair, believe me.
Truthfully, I mean, the way our board was made up anyways, we're not a hierarchical society here. We are a consensus-based group. So, I mean, I agree completely, Blake. I appreciate, everything Jesse's done, and I think we couldn't, and we'll repeat what Kurt said. We wouldn't be here without a lot of the work that you've put in and continue to do. But I do think that, having Blake as the chairman, I think he probably will bring some semblance of, strategic maneuvering within our meetings, which might help. I'm all for it as long as our direction stays the same and we don't see a general change in the need and necessity for consensus among our group. I think we'll be just fine.
Well, I think that's all fine too, I think that there's something underlying that's not.
Yeah, I'm trying to get
mentioned.
to it.
And
Give me a second here. I can do it here. Just give me a second. Okay. So, yes, the process by which I made my decision needs to be made public, I think. And so let me give take a couple of minutes. This could possibly go past 12. So let me just give a little preface to this. A few weeks ago, when Bob and Roger were in this board room talking about immigration and, in my opinion, sort of dividing the community with an immigration discussion, I made a public comment disagreeing with what they were doing. And around that same time, I also made comments on social media about my opinion. And I said, about Roger, I said that the things you're saying about immigration and about whether or not it's constitutional makes you look like an ignorant racist. And I said that on social media, and I stand by that statement today.
And he is.
Okay. Aside from that, I made the statement that these statements create an appearance, regardless of whether or not it's the case, it creates the appearance. And the reason I know it creates that appearance is because several people come up to me and said, hey, you know Roger a little bit. What's going on? Is he a racist? And so from that, because so many people say it, it's creating the impression. So that's separate. It's got nothing to do with this working group, and it's personal. Okay? So I said that. And then in response to that, Bob sent me an email saying that unless I apologize to Roger and retract my statements publicly, that he will not be able to support the agenda of the working group. That's what Bob sent to me in an official email.
Then he has a problem with this whole working group.
Absolutely.
And I think he needs to look at this meeting and see that.
And at the last board meeting, he stated that he had been unhappy with the direction that the working group had been going for quite some time, despite the fact that he had not indicated that or indicated the opposite at every time I gave a presentation at the board. So, I consider that to be borderline political blackmail. And Bob sent me that email saying that he would not be able to support the agenda of the working group unless I retracted statements on an unrelated issue on social media. So,
In a free and open society?
in a free and open society where people are supposed to speak freely, freedom of speech, right?
That's archaic.
So I responded saying, please don't censor me. And, I will speak freely as I want. If you have a problem with the policy of the working group, please share that with the working group publicly so we can change direction. One has nothing to do with the other. And so him indicating that he's not going to support the tax vote, which is what this was about, it required a fourth vote to pass the tax ordinance that we all worked on. I sent him a message back saying, after I spoke with Blake Alexander has agreed to take over as chairman of the group. Can the group have your support tomorrow with this change? He said yes. Bob wanted a change in the working group in order to support the tax. That's why I did what I did.
Okay, so I have to mention something about the way that the board, and I don't know if this is, has anything to do with what we're talking about, but it kind of does. I have watched a number of the Board of Supervisor meetings over the last, I've been to a handful of them, a number of them. I've watched a bunch of them on video. The supervisors, particularly Roger Gitlin and most assuredly Bob Berkowitz, is circumventing the order of a supervisor meeting. He is constantly making remarks after public comment, which is not a point of order. And I do believe that if someone was aware of this at a supervisor meeting and would stand up in a public comment and ask Chairman Howard for a point of order, Mr. Berkowitz will have to allow his comments that he does after public comment to be basically open to public comment. He has gotten into the habit of the last 5 or 6 Board of Supervisor meetings. They go through their process, they have a public comment period, and then Mr. Berkowitz says, excuse me, Chairman Howard, I would like to make a comment. He does not have that right to do that without public comment after. He is a voted-in person who has to stand up to the public and have the public respond to him, and he has gotten into a habit of avoiding and negating public comment to anything that he has said. And nobody in the public audience is aware of calling out a point of order will allow and open up the opportunity for someone to then respond to Mr. Berkowitz's somewhat and sometimes, pretty out there comments at that point. I just wanted to mention that to somebody because that is something I've been investigating over the last few months with him, and it's a very bad habit. And we need to put a stop to that as a community because he's basically standing up here and just imploring to everyone without the opportunity for the public to basically speak back at him. And that has happened, basically, I can document the last 5 Board of Supervisor meetings, Mr. Berkowitz has done that. So if anyone is at the next Board of Supervisors meeting and they do see Mr. Berkowitz stand up after a public comment and do that, please stand up and ask the chairman for a point of order.
So I was just going to suggest maybe that we deal with item number 3, and Jesse and I swap seats. You know, and he goes into the vice chair role, and you know, and just for whoever's out there and listening, and whoever cares, when we met our first meeting, we both got nominated or elected or whatever into these roles of chair and vice chair. So.
Yeah, you both got nominated in the roles of chair and vice chair. Standard situations in most boards would generally dictate a revote if somebody removed themselves without actually removing themselves completely off of the board. But what I hear Jesse saying, and I get where you're coming from, Jesse. You've got a passion for this topic, right? And then this is something that you've really worked really hard at. And it sounds to me like you were really, what you've worked at getting this tax ordinance in place and really wanting it to go forward, that was threatened, right? And you came up, it sounds like, with an alternative to helping this go forward and maybe seeing this committee continue by falling on your sword, let's say, right, as it would be, to try to get that tax measure forward and to try to step forward and be the bigger person in that scenario. Because from what I've gathered today and what I've heard previous, it's really what it sounds like. It sounds like you're trying to be the bigger person here, and you're trying to, and I just want to make sure that your participation on this board doesn't change in any way, because the reason I'm here is because I'm wanting to see this thing happen and happen soon, and the whole community as a whole isn't going to be without this if this isn't adopted in the next few months, right? At the end of December, that we're done if we don't have an ordinance in place months ahead of time. And so I just want to make sure that the working group continues to try to move forward as fast as possible with some of these things. And so, you know, your participation, the way it has been, is integral. And if it is that you truly choose that you don't want to be the chairman, that's fine. Let's switch places, right? You know, and that's fine with me. I absolutely would stand behind not choosing to do that and drawing a line a little bit, but I understand it, and you don't want to rock the boat, and then let's switch. Let's do that. That's okay with me. I just want to make sure that you're here, you know, doing what you're doing. So.
And I want to say the same. I support you in what you've done. You've held us together. As Blake said, we have the left and the right end of things, and we've kind of all got together to do the personal, and now we're into some of the other topics, and we're getting them done. They're a lot slower than I want to at times, but yes. And I think, Blake, you will do just as good a job in there as long as you keep boisterous. But I'm totally against a bully.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, a bully coming into the room and accusing you of something or saying something about you, and then you going away because of that bully. And your other statement of prejudiced, I still want to make that clear, because my kid had a problem with Gatlin at Smith River School, and it was because of that same thing. And he is racist, and I don't want that to be a bullying situation for it either. So if you really feel you need to step down for the better of the community and the better of this board, I'm for it. Yeah. But I don't like the bullying situation.
Yeah, I think you know, Supervisor Berkowitz's email should be made public. You know, that is something that I think every single person in this county needs to realize, that there's a supervisor out there that is willing to go to blackmail and extortion to get what he wants. And that has no place in our county anywhere from anybody. We are up here doing a diligent job. We are not paid, we're volunteers. We're doing our damnedest and hardest all the time to come up with a middle ground for our community that tries to appease everybody. And to have one supervisor, two supervisors, but one blatantly email a member of our board to extort him, to tell him that he will not support any one of us or any part of our board because of a social media post that had nothing to do with our job that we've been tasked with is absolutely asinine, and I don't know why there isn't a bigger public outcry. I mean, it absolutely abhors me to know that there's a supervisor who's willing to do that and go to those depths, because that's scary.
Yeah, I echo Bob's statement there with the bully, thing, maybe it's time to draw a line. I'll go with the board to be collegial, whichever way you go. But, I mean, it's not, to negotiate in terms like that seems a little off. But I'll go, I think Blake, I think Blake's been kind of fair representing the other side of the portion. The saddest thing is that this just isn't all that extreme because we've gotten so damn used to, this kind of thing.
Yeah, when we were in our first meeting, right, we all, and I can't remember, and maybe you guys can refresh my memory, all of the people that are appointed on this working group, including like, all the county members, right, that hold these seats, didn't everybody weigh in on the president and vice president role of that, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so-
correct, and I think staff also recognized, Jesse's expertise in the issue, I think it's fair to say.
And so, in order to make this switch, just in my opinion, which has nothing to do with wanting or not wanting to do it, I think we need to have all of these members here from staff, or at least a majority. I can't know how many people are on this committee now.
I
7.
think there are
One.
5 staff appointees.
we have a
Or is
quorum.
Or is Joel maybe not on the committee, it's just
There's 13 or
advising?
14 at least.
Okay, Joel's not.
Oh, Joel's not on the committee?
No,
So
Joel's not.
one, there's a city representative, the UROC representative.
I think 6 makes a quorum.
Yeah, they
5
were
or
appointed
6.
at the last
And
board meeting.
Bill is here representing the
Yes.
SO, so we have quite a few.
I was just wanting to make sure that we had a quorum,
quorum
I
is
guess you want to
5
say,
or
of
6.
voting, if that was the case? Okay. A quorum is, is probably at
Well, I'd like to
6 or
stick
7
with
or so
our,
here.
we didn't vote on chairman, and we
Yeah.
didn't vote on vice chairman.
No.
I was selected reluctantly as chairman by everybody else, and I accepted it. And then everybody asked to select a vice chair, and nobody said anything, and I asked for Blake to be vice chair, and everybody agreed.
Yeah, then we had a consensus.
It was a
I agree.
consensus, so
All right,
I
so-
think that's kind of how it went down. And
I asked Blake, hey Blake, would you be chairman? If we're gonna go that route, hey Blake, would you be chairman? If we're gonna go back to our first meeting style motion, I make a motion, hey Blake, would you like to be chairman?
So I'll just say that I don't personally care one way or the other. I don't need to be chair or not. I don't think that it affects my input on this project. If Blake doesn't want to add to his workload, he can ask any member of this group to do things, so including, I don't know the rules on giving the presentation at the board, but I think that's probably the same. I think the group can probably select anybody. So, in that regard, and in terms of standing up to a bully, yeah, if I thought I was losing something, then I wouldn't have agreed, The art of the deal, right?
Right.
Don't accept a deal.
Jesse, I think that, part of this is, right, it's pretty obvious what side I'm on and what side everyone else was on, and so I think it adds credibility to
Sure.
what we're ultimately going to have as a finished product, and I don't think it's going to change the finished product
I
or
think
the process.
I think the point is to prove that it doesn't change
Correct.
anything.
Right.
And then that the notion, that Bob's notion that changing the chairman of the board is going to drastically change the direction of the working group, if people want to believe that, super.
Well, let's just
That's great.
say that shows what certain Board of Supervisors members even understand is what's going on right here today. He has no clue as to what is actually happening here, if that is the case.
And I'd like to say too, because I did watch the Board of Supervisor video from the other night, and his statement that he he thinks that there's a lot of dysfunction going on in our group purely shows that he has not watched any of our videos, or has not done any of his due diligence to see what we're doing, because he's come up with a completely off-the-cuff definition of what we're doing. As you can tell right here, we are all on board together to come up with something that works for the community. And that shows more broad and bright than any remark that any one supervisor can make, so.
I
I'm all
agree.
for selecting Blake to be chair if everyone else is cool with it for whatever length of time that he wants to do it, until he wants to select a new chair.
I'm okay with that, as long as, number one, Jesse, you're the vice chair, and you continue to do these reports that the Board of Supervisors have requested every 2 weeks at the Board of Supervisors meetings.
It's fine with me.
Yeah, and I mean, I will definitely volunteer to speak to the board. I've done it a number of times. I have no problem with that. And so if there's any one day, Jesse, where you don't feel like it, because again, if you're feeling like, you've been kind of a lightning rod to, some of the supervisors, again, you're not, the responsibility doesn't solely fall on your shoulders. So, definitely, I think we can all pitch in. I mean, as much as we can. So we have a group support here.
Just hearing y'all talk, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to have to step up also sometimes. I think that will add credibility, right? If we all show a united front, if you will. Anyway, so I like where we're going.
It takes away the ability to accuse the group of not being united. So, okay, perfect.
Yeah, we're at least willing to accept the change that they're willing to tell us that they feel is our fault. And we'll be able to continue with what we're doing and hopefully accomplish our same goal.
In the same time
And in the same time frame, hopefully. And also, I think, though, the bullying part just has to stop. And
Well, there's
so-
definitely a 3-minute public comment for anybody who wants to go up to a Board of Supervisor meetings and express yourselves. Please feel free to do that and take 3 minutes.
Our next meeting, do we have our date set for 2 weeks? We're gonna do 2 weeks? Okay, and then for the next, for our agenda, Joel, I had put this manufacturing and processing thing, and Joel had suggested adding something else, with the optimism of finishing the retail thing, or if we got stuck on the retail thing, we'd have something else to discuss.
Let's get the retail thing back on there to
Okay.
finalize these numbers.
Okay, so can we just put verbiage like finalize retail ordinance? Like, can we state it like that? I haven't wanted to go ahead and state it as finalized retail ordinance, but can we make that a mission, even if,
Or finalize,
yeah, finalize recommendations? And then we can just continue, we'll put the manufacturing and processing thing on there in case we needed to talk about it. In case we have time to get to something else. Okay, all right. Unless there's any public comment? Nope. Final public comment? None? All right, meeting adjourned.
I think Blake is supposed to make that gavel, that's